What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of U4 Goblin Slayer Season 2. This is episode 12, and with me, as always, I have Bluespade.
I mean, it's fair to say that this entire season has been a complete letdown, in my opinion. Because
Unfortunately, I have to agree.
yeah, because
I was like trying to be patient with this season, but it's just honestly like a lot of it's just kind of boring. I mean, especially compared to season one. Like, I don't know. It just feels like it's just um I don't know. I mean, and especially with the way it ends, it just feels very anticlimactic in a way.
yeah, it's
Um,
I mean compare
yeah.
this to to the last OVA they released before the season, which was the Goblin's Crown. I mean that had like so many dark aspects in there, but this
Mhm.
entire season there was nothing dark about this show. There's like it's just like more than half the season is like a lot of slice of life elements, and there's not a lot of like there's not a lot of stuff fight scenes in this or content that even justifies Crunchyroll putting in that whole that ridiculous disclaimer saying that this show contains a lot of violence or like material that's uncomfortable for younger viewers or whatever. It's just there's nothing. It
Mhm.
just feels like just a tip. I don't know, just a typical like like C grade like shonen show.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, Jujutsu Kaisen is much darker and more brutal than this season has been. Uh, I mean, especially with like a lot of what happens with the characters. Um, I mean, this in comparison is pretty tame. I mean, season one had moments, but season two, yeah, for whatever reason, just we don't really see much of that. Like we see some of it, but there's just yeah, it really kind of shies away from a lot of elements that were there in season one with just some terrible things happening to characters and goblins being killed or other people being killed in pretty brutal ways. It feels like a lot of the characters have have quite a bit of plot armor honestly in this season with not kind of escaping death and I don't know. It just doesn't feel like how in season one where it's like, and it feels like anybody could have died.
Mhm.
But it doesn't really feel that way in season two.
Yeah, so the episode, of course, it follows up with the last episode in which the Goblin Slayer and his team are trying to save the princess, and which they eventually do. And of course, I don't know, like the princess, like is of course obviously traumatized, but we don't know like to what extent of like what the goblins really did to her. But before we can find out, like the goblin priest that Goblin Slayer defeats ends up like summons like this giant hand, like demon hand of sorts to attack them. So they eventually, I mean, there's nothing much to talk about this fight. It's just they eventually like they have trouble with it, but they push it back to the point where Sword Maiden ends up rescuing them at the last minute.
Well, they lure the hand into like some kind of a shaft. We find out it's an elevator shaft, but they lure it into like like a hole. It falls down the hole and then it tries to climb back up. Priestess creates a barrier to stop it, and we find out that there's an elevator that comes up the shaft, and the elevator just crushes the hand. Um, and yeah, that's pretty much the extent of that fight.
Yeah,
Um, like I thought at first, like as they said it was a greater demon or something. Like I thought actually that it had summoned some kind of giant demon they would have to fight. But no, it's just a disconnected like hand of a greater demon that they have to fight
yeah,
that like moves on its own.
yeah, and of course,
Uh,
oh yeah, eventually they eventually beat it, and then of course they're surrounded by hundreds of goblins waiting for them. Uh, and then as soon as like like before they end up fighting the goblins, the sword maidens arrive with uh with an army of adventurers coming to save them at the last minute. And of course the sword maiden, of course, like she displays like some amount of fear about confronting the goblins, but it's not, we don't really get to see much of her soon after this episode.
yeah, I mean, I guess it shows that Sword Maiden is trying to overcome her fear and her PTSD, and she's actually trying to do something for once.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, it also shows how powerful she is. She's able to summon like I guess like some kind of lightning magic to deal with all the goblins.
Yeah, and then, of course, soon after this, there was another plot point that happened,
Oh,
soon.
this was really
It
weird
was just
too
it was
because
just random. It's just so
yeah,
apparently, like, this whole kidnapping with the princess was arranged by, like, these corrupt nobles, but apparently, they end up getting stopped by this random guy called the Knight of Diamonds who ends up defeating them. It's just
yeah. I mean, I was just like, who like who is this
I mean,
person?
you would think that it would be Goblin Slayer, doing it, taking care of all this stuff, but it's just like they have like we've noticed like in these past several episodes, they have like these random heroes we don't even know about that like that happen to run
Yeah,
across like whatever Goblin Slayer and his team are doing, but they just I don't know. I don't know the reason for this. It's just like just comes out of freaking nowhere. I mean, you would think that it'd be related to something that Goblin Slayer would be involved in, but it's just other people are just taking care of this stuff. And then of course, soon after that, the princess is returned home and then, this decides to become like a mage like the priestess. And and then of course everyone gets back home celebrating like as if like it's like in another day's work done or something like that. And then of course Goblin Slayer
yeah.
comes back home to Cowgirl and just thinking about what he plans on doing, just continuing killing goblins soon after that, and then that's it. That's the episode.
Yeah, it's just a really like it's just like a really underwhelming way to end the season, honestly. It's just like I mean the biggest thing they face is a giant hand. Uh I mean it's I don't know. I have really mixed feelings I guess about this season. Uh I mean it's not terrible, but it's just not up to the up to the kind of quality we saw with the first season. It just feels like it's uh, a lot of it felt like very like much like filler content, and there wasn't really too much of a plot. Like a lot of it just kind of focused on random, almost like side quests the characters were going on. I felt like it was kind of was going to have a plot about that boy that Goblin Slayer was trying to train, but then he goes off to do something else. And then after that, I felt like season two just kind of became almost like a series of side objectives, side plots, and there wasn't really any kind of like coherent overall overarching plot. And I mean, I feel like that can work for a series, but the problem with Goblin Slayer season two is like a lot of it just felt like we mentioned before, like very much like slice of life almost, with the characters going to Elf Archer's wedding or her sister's wedding, and stuff like that. It's like I don't really care about that, to be honest. I mean, it felt like it was kind of an opportunity to sort of, I guess, somewhat flesh out Elf Archer's character, but most of what happened there just wasn't really that interesting. Um, I mean, and that could just kind of be said, unfortunately, for most of season two. It doesn't feel like we've mentioned before. It just doesn't feel like it's as gritty or as dark as season one. I mean, it has its moments for sure, but it just doesn't really feel like it's very tame almost in comparison to a lot of what happens in season one and also the Goblin's Crown movie. Um, I really don't know if this is just due to the studio change or what the reason is, but it just doesn't. I mean, it looks the same. It just doesn't have the same, I guess, general tone. It seems like. I mean, I don't know. At least it kind of felt that
Yeah,
way
I mean,
after watching
I
it.
mean, I don't think Crunchyroll even knew what kind of material was going to be released, but it just doesn't seem. Yeah, it doesn't have that gritty feel like it did back in season one and the Goblin's Crown movie. Just yeah, honestly,
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about this season to be honest, and I don't even know
Well,
if
I mean, what's even more disappointing is that we had to wait a while for season two, and then we finally get it, and it's sort of just. I mean, I would say just okay at best, if anything. Um, and it just doesn't really live up to the hype that season one had. It just felt like it just kind of took a huge step down in quality, honestly, in comparison to season one. And I mean, it sucks to say that because I mean, I like season one, but yeah, this is just I'm not sure how to feel about this, honestly. Um, so yeah, I mean, I guess if I were to give this a score, just like I don't, I really I'm not sure if I want to give it a five. Like it wasn't necessarily that bad. Like it had potential, but it just didn't really go anywhere with it. I guess.
Yeah, I
Maybe a six, but it's just yeah. I don't
yeah,
know.
I give this a 5 because I really
Yeah.
didn't feel like it, reached the same level as the previous seasons did because it's just the fact that with Goblin Slayer's development, I really felt like, it reached its peak back in the end of season 1 in which he decided to, to unmask himself and everyone gets to see his face and then, see him as like,
I mean,
as an actual person for once, but then, like, we don't
yeah.
get to see that again. We don't get to see that moment again, in this season. I mean, we do get to see him
It did.
take his helmet off, but
Yeah.
it's just
It felt like they were trying to do something with that, with him like kind of grieving over his sister's death, and then sort of I guess seeing the like kind of seeing his maybe like his sister in the Mage Boy or something, because of what happened with season one and what happened with his sister, uh, but yeah, it's just kind of felt like we sort of forgot about that after it happened. Like it felt like they were kind of trying to develop Goblin Slayer's character a little bit with that, but then they just sort of it never really gets brought up again. Like he never really, it just felt like he just kind of goes back to how he usually is,
yeah.
and yeah, I mean it was a little bit disappointing because I was thinking they were going to do something with that, but yeah, nothing ever really comes of it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh,
Honestly, it's hard to even tell whether or not they're gonna decide to do a season 3 at this point. I don't know. It's not clear what kind of other storylines they have planned on it, and honestly, I don't know if I really much care at this point, due to, like, how
yeah,
disappointing the season was.
yeah. Unfortunately, it's just yeah. I mean, we watched it till the end, but it just wasn't. It just wasn't really that impressive. I mean, honestly, it's a little bit of a letdown, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, hopefully, if they do decide to do a season three, maybe they can sort of correct some of the mistakes that happened in season two, or maybe hand it to a different director or whoever, whatever the reason is for why this season was sort of a bit of a drop in quality. I mean, it could even be the source material. I don't really know because I haven't read the light novels, but yeah, I don't know. I don't really, unfortunately, I don't really have too much else to say about season two or this episode in particular. Though I don't know if you have anything else to say
I
about
mean,
it.
not really much. I mean,
Yeah.
I was excited at first, but then the longer the show dragged on, the more disappointed you know, and I ended up getting just seeing how like how tame this entire show was. I thought we have
Mhm.
like the same gritty, dark tone like we did in previous seasons and that OVA movie that was released prior to this. But then I asked myself, what happened after this? I mean, I would assume that we're
Yeah.
following
I
the source
it
material.
just feels like it kind of makes the goblins not really feel like as much of a threat as they were in season one either. I mean, there are times I guess in season two where yeah, I mean they almost the characters are in trouble, but they fairly easily get out of it. So they're you never really feel like they're really in any real danger most of the time.
Yeah. I mean, unlike, back in Goblin's Crown, like in which we see like how, just how, dread, like what was it? Like just how much of a threat that the goblins, are, considering that most adventurers don't really, view them much of as a threat, which is ironic because this season feels because the goblins in this season don't really feel much of a threat compared to as they were in back in prior seasons.
Yeah. Yeah, but I guess that all being said, guys, until next time, we will see you all later.